in the virtual room with me today, we have several wonderful artists of colour who are going to introduce themselves in just a moment. And we're going to be discussing Shakespeare, race and performance. And this is the first of a series of roundtable discussions that we hope to be having on this topic and a few other related topics. So take it away, guys. Gregory.
Hey, I'm Gregory Diaz. My parents are Sri Lankan, and I was born and raised in Australia. I have been acting for the last 10 years, and currently I'm studying for disability work.
And Haki?
Hi, Haki Crisden. I'm American born. I'm from Virginia. I moved to Australia about 13 and a half years ago. And I've been acting for 5+ years, and all of that experience has been here. I had one-off way back in the day in the US. So my experience with acting and drama and a little bit of directing that too have all been here in Australia, which is a very different context from the US. So glad to be here.
We're very happy to have you. And Angie as well?
Hi, I'm Angie, and I'm Kenyan born. I've been here for like 3 years now, and I pretty much started acting the moment I came here, like seriously acting. So I could say most of my experience has been in Australia. And yeah, I'm currently studying education. So yeah.
And Angie and Haki have also been involved in a couple of our Stream Shakespeare shows. Haki the most, I would say. And Haki will actually be directing Titus Andronicus for a live stream on the 19th of July. So we're all very excited to announce that. And he'll be talking about some of his ideas for that production a bit later on. Angie was also in Sunday Sonnets, directed by Sam Huff a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Gregory has yet to be in one of our shows.
Real pressure.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we thought we'd do was, after we've got our general introductions out there, we thought we'd talk about some of the questions that were raised when we put a call out for questions. And after that, I really don't want to be too much in charge because I'm a white chick. This is not my field of expertise, and you guys, your lived experience and what you've read and understood as artists of colour is far more valuable for this conversation. So I really want this to be led by you guys as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Kim Jones had a question that she put forward. So how do you guys feel about some of the racist references in Shakespeare's plays? For example, the term Ethiop being considered as an insult. And do you think they should be removed in productions of his work? Haki, did you want to start it?
Okay, I'll start off. Well, how do I feel about it is a bit more complex question, but I'll take the second one first. No, I don't think they should be removed. I mean, even just from the standpoint of them being in art history document, that needs to be there. I don't like the idea of whitewashing our art so that it sort of sanitizes it from the standards that we had in our time. And I believe that of pretty much anything. That doesn't mean you want to. I think there are some times when it's appropriate to offer some context for something. Shakespeare is wonderful in the sense that there's no one sitting there telling you that you can't do any sort of presentation with it. So you can do all kinds of things with those insults. You can take those insults, turn them on their head, and do things. So there are all kinds of ways to be aware of the impact that the words have or the situations have, and twist and turn them to your advantage. And I think that's actually the key. And then getting into how I feel about it is you need to be aware of it. If you do a production, and you don't have, and you're sort of treated as if you do not have as if the words don't have any weight and aren't going to mean anything and aren't going to be offensive to anybody. You just gloss over it like it's nothing. Then you really deprive the audience of a chance to cast a critical eye and make a statement and say something. It cheapens the work, but that's the idea: being aware of it. Yeah.
I'd have to agree with Haki with the whole. I personally wouldn't. I think it's more dependent on how it's performed and like where the director takes it. But most of those things, most of Shakespeare work is history embedded, and people just trying to kind of just do or like remove something as they please or stuff like that. Yes, is kind of whitewashing it and just kind of telling people of color, like, whatever you go through or whatever experiences you've gone through years and years is not important. So I personally wouldn't remove it, but I think it's also dependent on how the director takes it, how the performance is done, because that's also another case. Because I feel like if they end up somewhat giving the cast this vision of, yes, white is superior, then that's another case. But yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I suppose it's the very strong difference between presenting something and endorsing it.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I say that to myself so often, Holly, that I'm not sure how much to what extent people outside of the arts grasp that. Sometimes it seems like there are a lot of people who consider depiction endorsement. That seems to happen a lot. So I'm really glad.
Gregory, you've worked in musical theatre quite a lot, and you said that you haven't had a whole heap of experience with Shakespeare. Have you had experience with other sort of texts or work from the past that has brought up these kind of issues for you?
Actually, I haven't had a whole lot of experience in theatre. I'm more film, commercial, and I do role play work. I'm trying to get into musical theatre. Maybe that's what I mixed up those messages. Yeah. My theatre experience in terms of the range of plays and things that I've had access to has been quite small. I was in a play called Murad Sad at the New Theatre, and I toured with a theatre show in 2015. And last year I was in a show called Curry Kings of Parramatta. So I wouldn't have the comparable experience to really give a good answer to your question, I think.
You've mostly performed work that has been written in the last, say, 30 years, 40 years.
Yeah, except for Murad Saad being an older play. And that one was specifically done at the New Theatre with as diverse a cast as you can imagine. And it was had a layer added to it where, so I'll just give you a quick breakdown. The play is a bunch of inmates at a mental asylum are made to put on a play for the aristocracy. So it's a play within a play, and then it was a play within a play within a play, because the third layer was we were refugees, then made to put on this Murad Saad play. And that was essentially what it was about. And the director was beautiful. He just made Haki knows Leilani. Leilani played an incredible role in that play, and we had females playing male roles and vice versa. Yeah, I guess I didn't answer your question at all, did I?
No, but that's perfectly fine, really, because I would really love to talk about this concept of colorblind casting and whether it really is a solution or whether it's just maybe adding to the problems or creating different problems, or what that means for you all as artists of color and how you would like to engage in it particularly for Haki as you're a director as well as an actor, and thinking about casting choices that you're making.
Yeah. Can I just, before we jump ahead to that, can I just ask Angie and Greg, because it's real, I think it's closely related to what we're just talking about.
Yeah.
Either of you all had experiences where you were cast in a part that where ethnicity was not really an essential part of the role, but then once you were cast in the part, you felt like you and your castmates had to sort of adapt the part to bring in that aspect?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a sad reality, but most of my experiences has been that. And it's either it's either fight or flight. You just do it, or you try and like reason out, or like try and view out your opinion. But yeah.
So it sounds like what you're saying though is it's been something that has been, you didn't necessarily want to do it that way. It's been sort of thrust upon you. It doesn't sound like it's been a positive experience.
Yeah. And also sometimes there are certain characters that definitely like, they don't have like any ethnic background that they've specified. And once you get the role, you realize, oh, wait, all the character traits that they're kind of trying to portray is somewhat pretty much what people put upon my race. Or so that's, yeah. So it starts, you start questioning as to why they gave you that role. And yeah, it's a lot, but I think I think it depends with the show. I tend to view my opinion. Sometimes the director lashes out or threatens to take away the role from you, which is by all means fine. But sometimes people do realize that they actually didn't do that on purpose and try and meet you halfway because they don't want you to feel uncomfortable. So it depends on the people that you work with, I guess. So yeah.
Have you worked with directors of color where that's happened?
Directors of no. I think they're more racially conscious and wouldn't want you to feel as if your experiences or how the arts view people of color to be just like something to put under the carpet, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So far, if I work with a director who's, a person of color, I'd say that. I find it to be more enjoyable and having more experience in terms of who I am and knowing my identity in the arts industry compared to other type of directors, I guess. But I mainly major in music theater, which is somewhat different to, like normal theater or film per se. So, yeah.
Well, Shakespeare is not really normal when it comes to cinema, I suppose. It's very much it's like this superlative canon in theatre, I guess. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but people also do have to realize that with such art, it's not meant to be taken as you're meant to grow in as much as there's all this history and all these artworks that started like in the 15th century and all that. Like art reforms and grows. So I think, once people have that mindset, we still learn from what happened. That's what we have to do. Learn from history and build a better future, pretty much. And I feel like that's how art should take its vision. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested, Gregory, when you did Marat Sade, that there was this extra framing device of the refugees putting on this show. Did you feel that was a way that the director found a kind of avenue into casting a diverse cast?
I honestly don't think so, based on what I've seen from the new theatre. I think they're quite a wonderful theatre for that gives such creative freedom to their directors to put their creative vision out there. Just so you know, the director of this play was a white South African man, 65-year-old white South African man, extreme lefty, like, total lefty. He marched for civil rights in South Africa. He really did just cast the roles as wide as he could and just chose the best people for the job. Like, he really just chose whoever was the best for the job. And that's again why Leilani, for example, got this major role in it. The woman who played Mara was, which is a lead role. It's a male role. It's a very, specifically a specific type of role. The woman who played it, she was just spectacular at playing that role, and she got it, So I think it was just him having a wide vision. And I think, if I remember correctly, because I came in very, very late to the production on the recommendation of my friend, and it just so happened that more diverse people started to fall into the cast, and I think it started to morph the vision a bit. And I think at the time that the play was on, there was some real big stuff going on in the news about were they closing down Nauru? They were closing down one of the detention centers, and we wanted to bring light to that. So I feel like that play to me was just a victory of artistic integrity and vision more than anything. I don't think it had. Yeah, I think it was the pinnacle of what I would dream that all art could be like in Australia.
I guess the question for me as an actor, and even more as a director, is I wonder how to navigate this tension between the idea of colorblind casting for merit, for pure merit, and color conscious casting for directorial intent, and to uncover aspects of maybe the text that are racially motivated, are possibly very racist, as a lot of Shakespeare and a lot of old classic texts are, and how to navigate that kind of world. Like, do you make this choice purely on merit and you ignore the racial element, or is that perhaps whitewashing? Is that kind of ignoring the experience of that actor and the overtones and the ideas that casting will inevitably bring up? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, someone else want to go on at this one first? Going on things here. No?
That's a tough question.
I kind of want to stew on it, because I do have answers, but I would like to let it stew a bit.
It's such a complex topic. I think I would caution against any sort of idea that there is an absolute easy answer to it. When you're directing, obviously you need a vision for the entire show. I mean, that's something that's been that actually was sort of pounded home for me long before I ever even really seriously thought about directing, that's your job. You shouldn't be sitting there sort of wondering what you're looking for. You have to be looking for something. And your casting decisions are part of that. Now, I really, to me, the term colorblind casting is laughable. It's a joke. It doesn't exist. I sent to you a message the other day that there's no more colorblind casting than you wouldn't notice someone who walked in with one leg. It's a very obvious thing that you see. So you need to be aware of it. understand exactly what you're trying to do with your show and cast for that reason. I become very uncomfortable at the idea of people saying of merit apart from any sort of demographic qualification. It starts to get towards a territory where people deny that they see those differences. And I think that's we know, of course, we know that none of that's true. So but I mean, you can look at some things in a general sense and say and have guidelines. For example, if you're doing a historical play, or to make it relate more specifically to Shakespeare, if you're doing an Othello and you really need to cast a Black actor as Othello, unless you have an incredibly good reason for not doing so. For example, if you're going to flip it and make Othello white and all the other characters in the play are Black, that kind of thing. You cannot just sort of idly erase the ethnicity of that character without greatly changing the meaning of the work. So you can't that's not a role where you can just sort of pretend that it doesn't matter. But say, for example, if you're taking apart, like Cassio in that play, also in that play, I believe, I'm certain of it. Yet there was a production at the Globe last year before last, or something like that, where Cassio was played by a Black actor as well. And that also changes the dynamics of things. Race is such a core part of that show that you really need to be aware of what you're doing with anything that you cast in that show. Whereas, for example, if you're doing, I played Theseus and Oberon in Midsummer Night's Dream, and it's largely irrelevant. And I was at Titania and Oberon, was played by a white Australian actress. And that was largely irrelevant. But that's what we were doing. We had no interest in making it relevant. But if you wanted to do that, you could cast that, particularly in the context of like the United States. One of the things I've often said about that when Midsummer Night's Dream experience was, it was liberating to play that role opposite a white Australian actress in Australia, because if it were done in the United States, people still pay a whole lot more attention to it being an interracial relationship. And you would have felt like you needed to address that somehow within the play. Whereas here in Australia, for that particular, then Australia's got its problems for sure, but for that particular aspect of things, not as much focus on it being an interracial relationship. So we could do the show and not feel like we had to address it. If I did that show in the US and played it opposite a white actress, I would feel like we needed to address it somehow. I mean that you have to alter the entire play, but you need to find a way to make it, because audiences are going to really notice it. So it matters, the context.
I'll just say this one story. I had a really interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's an actor of color recently, and he was saying that he had this experience where it was clear that it wasn't being done on merit, and people weren't being cast in Australian commercials on merit, because he was sent to a casting of for the buddy role, like the friend role. And it was a very, very ethnically diverse audition group, people trying out for the part. And then he was accidentally also sent to the audition for the lead role. And he realized that it was an accident, because everyone there was blonde, blue-eyed, white-skinned, and kind of like the Hemsworths. and this lead role was going to be paying, probably twice as much as the buddy role. And so they made a show at the time of saying, oh, yes, please audition, do the reading. But he kind of knew he was never going to get that role. And it was an accident that he had been even asked to audition. And I thought that kind of tokenism is still rife in Australia and all over the world, that people will cast do a diversity casting just for the minor roles, but not in really key roles, and sometimes avoid dealing with the questions that casting ethnically ambiguous or biracial or artists of color in a lead role, the questions that might raise, perhaps. Anyway, I thought that was a really telling story. I thought it was just worth telling everyone here today.
Right.
Quite interesting you say that, because I got an audition for, yes, it was the lead role, but it was I found it a bit funny at the fact that the lead role was meant to be kind of primitive, like throwing spears, and that was in all reality, that was the lead role. When I compared it to the other auditions where it was more other people, like white people auditioning, and it was more like advanced, like sitting at a desk, tech work kind of scenario. So it was interesting seeing how, yes, it's a lead role, but at the same time, what are you portraying us as? Yeah. So
Definitely. I think there are really sort of slots in people's minds. One of the things that you hear, or at least I've heard, and Greg and Angie, you guys tell me if you've heard this. I've heard folks that I've met a couple folks on a set, like a simple shoot or whatever, and they said, well, you've got an advantage. I said, well, what's that?
Oh,
well, there's some parts that they're just looking for you, and I just sort of, you guys, you all know what I'm talking about. It's this, and you want to say, well, yes, that's true. There is the odd job where they're particularly looking for someone of a particular ethnicity or a dark skin color or whatever. Do you not realize that the default 99% of the time when they don't mention that,
yeah,
white actor, because that's what they picture. And I want to say that is, I think, part of the nature of humans is that we tend to see ourselves in our stories, whatever we are, whatever our background, ethnicity, and everything. So when creative people sit down and they come up with a story, subconsciously or consciously or whatever, they end up being the hero of it. That's kind of the way humans work. So one of the things, and for that reason, one of the things that I've always really championed is putting people in positions to make decisions, as opposed to saying, having a script that someone brings in and says, right, okay, add 3 people of color to it, or whatever. I think that comes up. I think that produces really atrocious and sometimes insulting and offensive art. I mean, I realize it's an industry and people need jobs, but it can be really, really awful sometimes to do things that way. So representation in creative jobs, I think, is really important, and that's how you get good, diverse art, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, given that you're going to be in a position of decision-making power with Titus Andronicus, have you got any ideas about? Obviously, not mentioning any names, but. Well, you can if you want to. Any ideas about how you might approach casting that? Because it's a very interesting play from a race sort of and performance standpoint, given it has such a key role for a Moor character. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. Aaron, one of the very first characters that Shakespeare wrote, where ethnicity was very specifically an aspect of the character. And it doesn't beat around the bush. Aaron's ethnicity as a Moor is a huge part of that role. One of the podcasts that you linked to the other day, where they were discussing that, among other things, race and Shakespeare, talked about it, and someone mentioned that was the first Black Power speech. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say Shakespeare wrote the first Black Power speech. That's a bit confronting, but he does have a character there who very proudly says, I mean, essentially he says the 1600s version of Black is beautiful. And you certainly don't hear that a lot in Shakespeare. So, but at the same time, Aaron also brings in a lot of questions about what exactly his motivations are. I mean, a lot of things that he says is basically like, I love being evil. I wish I could do more evil. My only regret is you're putting me here to death is that I don't have 1,000 more evil things I can do to you. So, and the play doesn't spend a whole lot of time explaining that. So I think I don't want to give too much away. I do have some really strong ideas about what I want to do with it, but in the context of everything that's going on around the world and in the United States with Black Lives Matter and everything right now, I want to put Aaron's character and the way that he sort of very proudly stands up and expresses, Black as a part of his identity. I want to make that a part of the character, and so casting will be a big part of that. So now the other thing about that, and this is kind of gets back to what I was saying with Othello earlier, if you're doing that and you've got a character like that who's his character is a big aspect of the show, but the show itself is not about race relations. You could try to make it that way, but I'm not going full on in that approach. What winds up being interesting then after that is if you cast characters opposite that, you need to be aware of that dynamic. Because he's going to be very much involved in that. That means the characters you put next to him have to relate to him that way. And I think that I'm going to spend a lot of time looking at how he and Tamora relate to each other. That's going to be a significant aspect of it. I have not put in my head specific people that I want to play those particular roles. I don't particularly like to do that when you've got competitive casting, but I certainly have ideas about what I want, and it's going to be relevant to relevant to current affairs.
Mm. Yeah. That's very exciting.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Angie and Greg, have you ever been directed shows yourselves? Been interested in directing?
Well, not really. I don't think I have the skills to be a director, but yeah, writing probably, directing, yeah, just not a hat I would per se have. But yeah.
Is there a show you feel strongly enough about with that, Angie, where that your mind might change about that? Something you have a strong enough vision about that you'd want to say, I want to make that happen?
I haven't, well, not at the top of my head, okay. But yeah. No, not at the top of my head per se. But all I can add in terms of like directing and all that, it's the fact that all I know is if you can't justify the reason why someone is in a role, just don't do it. That's pretty much it. Yeah. So if you can't justify as to why you gave this person this role and how that affects the whole dynamic in the cast and the storyline, just don't do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Gregory, have you ever been in a position where you have had some kind of decision-making power in an artistic context?
Actually, yes. Funny enough, I go back to Murat Sard again. That director I've never worked with anyone like that. With his many, many years of acting and directing experience, I've never seen someone so open to every suggestion from the cast. The entire cast of, was it 25 in the cast, all had to say and input into, and he was always open and willing to listen and take things on board. So there was that, and the last play I was in, again, this incredible director from the UK. She's a powerhouse, but she had some openness, and she actually encouraged me to direct and take over some directing roles in the play. And I was like, no, I've seen what you do. It's way too hard. Like, I admire directors. I really do. You have so much to juggle. It's not like you just cast and put on the play. You're working, what is it? They say you work 6 months before the production all the way through, and then 6 months after you're working on the production,
Yeah.
So for that reason, that's more the reason I'm not so interested in directing. I love working with actors. I love moving them around. I love the play of that, but I love performing way too much, and I could not handle all the. You guys have to talk to everybody. Like, you have to deal with everything. So you have to know where to put things. I'm like, how is my director currently setting? How can you see what the stage is going to look like? I don't get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They kind of have to have all the answers there.
Yeah.
No, you don't. You just have to cast really well, and then the actors give you lots of answers.
Do everything. Oh, but look, one thing I just remembered I was to say, it's I think it's important to talk about casting really specifically, and this goes against me not being, just rejecting this fallacy of colorblind casting. Like, if you're casting, any role, but I'll come back to Othello just because I've got an anecdote for that one. Brown skin doesn't mean Black actor.
True.
You know what I mean? So, but that's a big aspect of it. So, and also Black means different things, something completely different here in Australia than it does in the United States. So if you're really looking to get people whose experiences are keyed into that particular ethnicity for the part, you need to take care to see that you're actually doing that, and that can be a real challenge here. It's one thing that's happened a lot in my time on the stage here is like fitting into contexts for when we're doing American plays here in Australia. It happens a lot. I get approached to do American plays a lot, and I've had some really good experiences doing them, but it is a challenge lots of times because you've got people who may be Australian, someone they're looking to cast somebody, and cast somebody with an Aboriginal background to play an African American. Well, that's a completely different cultural context, and vice versa. Yeah. The same is true. So you really just need to be sort of specific about where you look for, and recognize that there are real differences, and take those into account. That's
right. Yeah, there was an experience like that with a famous theatre company here that put on a play about Sri Lankans. And I think it was one of those few times where I was absolutely livid when I found out many months later, because somebody who was being cast said, "Hey, how come you didn't audition for this?" And I'm like, "I never heard about it." And they had put all their publicity and media was talking about how they searched far and wide to find the perfect actors. And they ended up casting all people with the same colored skin for the roles. But, and it is true, like Sri Lankan specifically is very rare. Even Indian is not very easy to find in Australia. In the acting realm, there's not a whole lot. They did cast somebody who was of Indigenous background in one of the roles, and they actually went overseas to get some actors to play it and some non-Sri Lankans to play some of the roles. And the reason I was so upset was because I knew one of the ADs. I knew the AD, and I was surprised that she didn't reach out to me. And B, they said that they searched far and wide, but if they had just done a showcast search, I would have popped up. I definitely would have popped up, and I never got a call or an audition. And here's where I'm interested to hear you guys and what you have to say. This is where I get conflicted because, all right, Angie, if you two got cast in those roles in that Sri Lankan play, I'd be conflicted because I'm like, yeah, but I like knowing that people of a different ethnicity are getting jobs because they're so rare. So when I saw, for example, an Indian person, or I think someone was Malaysian and someone else was Indigenous, I was like, but I want them to have work too, So I'm not angry at them at all. But at the same time, a part of you gets hurt saying, hi guys, could you have at least seen me for the role? Could you try? Because I was on the right channels. I was absolutely on all the right channels. And I did actually go into the theatre company just to speak to the directors. And just saying, are there any roles left? And they couldn't leave the room fast enough and saying, oh yeah, well, we put everything online and we did everything that we had to do. And it almost felt like I was talking to politicians who give that stock line. It was one of my most, I still kind of get a bit worked up about it, but because I try really hard to, let's see what's the other person's perspective. Like, it is hard to cast and everything. But when I sat with it, I'm like, no, this is really wrong. This is so annoying. And clearly they didn't really do the search they had. It was just the story that they put in to make it look good. So I'm curious, how would you guys feel if, say, Angie, if it was a play about, because you said you were from Kenya, people from Kenya, and you never even got a call for the audition, and you've got your profiles and everything up to date, and then you saw somebody who was, say, Sri Lankan or Indian background cast in those roles because they found the best talent, and it was so hard to find Kenyan people. Would that not, doesn't that set a bit of a fire in you?
It would upset me, but it's as Haki said, there's no black or white answers, because
that's right.
it's upsetting, but at the same time you're trying to be supportive with people who are in the same boat per se. But it's I think yes, well, I think at the same time I feel like you can be happy for someone, but while still feel like your emotions and your emotions are validated, despite if someone else is doing great, if that makes sense. So I feel like you shouldn't beat yourself up by feeling bad that you're feeling bad about it. That's what I'm trying to say. But I would definitely feel upset, considering the fact that I was out there willing to audition or at least get an opportunity to show them what I can do, and because I don't know.
Yeah. Well, particularly go ahead, Greg. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, so where I go with casting and things, this is a line that I've used and my friends have used. We're not saying just give us roles or whatever because you should have more people of color or something. That's even though we'd love that. We're saying, I've always said, can I please have the opportunity to be in the room? If it doesn't specifically need to be a certain ethnicity, if it can be just a male from this age group to this age group, and it's not going to significantly change, the vision of the play or what's necessary. I want to be able to go into those roles because I have many friends of Anglo background who will go for many castings that don't need a specific ethnicity, and they go from that age range. That's what many of my friends say. We just want a chance to be in the room, really, and just to know that at least that we have an equal opportunity, to get work. And we're not unfortunately, a friend of mine who had cast me in a role, when we were talking about race and diverse casting, and I was mentioning this specific fact, and this guy, I don't know, it blew my mind. It really upset me. He came and he said, this whole diversity thing, it's taking jobs away from people because you got a job that someone else was supposed to get. And I was like, whoa. It's like, there was someone else I wanted in the role, but the client, they wanted, you because they wanted more diversity. And it whacked me so hard at the time to hear him say that I had taken jobs away from other people. And I honestly, I didn't know how to feel about it.
I think that's victim blaming.
But there's we had this conversation, Holly and I, because we work in an industry. If we were all in advertising, it wouldn't matter what we look like. Say banking, right? But because we're actors, we're saying, Holly, there's some roles where you need the guy to be 6'5", And if I go in for that role, I'm not going to be right for that vision. So it's an industry where jobs do depend on a look for the aesthetic or whatever it is. And as you guys have brought that up. So it's so, when he said that about I had taken a job away from someone, I thought, but what if they decided there was a blonde and a brunette and they just decided to go for the brunette because they liked using a brunette and each person was equal? How, when he took it as, yeah, just because of ethnicity, you got the job. It had nothing to do with my skill or anything. That's what really, really hurt, because I thought, it does, when they're equal talents, people will go for some sort of distinguishing factor. And I like to know that, it was my ability to perform in the role that got me the role. And yeah, maybe they wanted a bit more, a different look, but maybe that was just their choice at the end when they decided they were two good actors,
Yeah.
Well, what that guy said was it's a deliberately oblivious mindset, or kind of a willful ignorance that maintains the status quo. I mean, if you're talking about, oh, well, you took a job away from someone else. So, and I crack open, ad books and I see 1,000, performers, white performers, and there are like 5 black performers in there get a job. Like, how did those 5 black performers take away, roles from anyone else? So that's just really just sort of, it's willful ignorance. I think it's a deliberate lack of understanding. One of the things that's come up here in the last few minutes of the conversation, I think it sort of points up the tension between the desire for artistic integrity or expression and industry realities, jobs, people on jobs. That's a big thing that we run into. I remember, this is apart from the subject of race a little bit, but I think it directly relates to what we're talking about here. When Pop-Up Globe was here, they had 2 companies. They had one mixed gender company, and they had one company that was all male. And while I really appreciated, from the standpoint of someone who's kind of into Shakespeare, the idea of doing an all male troupe, because that's what they were doing back in the day. I mean, you're trying to give an Elizabethan presentation. I didn't want to support this, but I didn't want to give my money to those plays because I felt like there are working actresses who should have those roles. So I only went to see the mixed gender company. So that's a balancing act, and I don't think the answer always ends up being the same. So that's a tough one.
That's an issue that I would really like if we do have another roundtable where we talk about women in this kind of topic. I think it would be really interesting to discuss that whole idea of, historically informed performance, and whether we should be sacrificing some women having jobs for the sake of having an all-male cast to explore that historical element of performance, and whether maybe that is treading that line into endorsement instead of just presentation.
Well, artistically, it's about how you do it. But then, when you get into commerce, other issues come up. You could certainly do an all-male thing. You could do an all-male thing and do a complete comment on the horrors of sexism. You could do it that way. You actually lend it to itself that way. But you've still, if it's professional, you've taken jobs away from women. And there are only so many of those, especially for the stage.
Yeah, I think I was just, you've obviously, Holly, you've heard of Shakespeare in Australia. Yeah. And this is again where it's so if I think the reason Shakespeare worked for me is because traditionally what we're talking about is that women are missing out on roles. Women haven't had the chance to play all these amazing roles, so they're getting the opportunity to show what they can do and play all these roles. And then you do have a small or extreme kind of right or offended or some defensive group that goes, oh well, look at that's discrimination. That you're discriminating against men in this example. And I try to say in that instance, the difference here is that the women were never this group is the women in this particular instance, were never in a position where they had tons of work, and they're now excluding you more. They're more just giving themselves an opportunity to do this. So it's a minority, just, creating a special circumstance where they get to have fun and do all the stuff that they were denied. I had a point in what I was going to say, but like, for example, I think where it gets a bit tricky, where like, say, Haki, you talked about the all-male troupe. The way I see why that's difficult is because, traditionally men did get all of the roles, and there was a time when women couldn't perform at all, which is why that is different to having, say, an all-black cast or an all-female cast as something special.
I think that I probably will get in trouble for saying this, but I think that it has some correlation to this idea that blackface and brownface and yellowface is no longer acceptable, because it is white people who are in a position of structural privilege taking jobs away from people who are in a position of structural oppression, and secondly, taking over their representation and their voice as well as their job.
It's a double, absolutely. It's just awful in every way, because it from commerce, it takes away jobs, but it plays into the most grotesque caricatures and stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
That leads into that. I mean, that deliberately leads into situations where you go into a room, an audition or something or whatever, and someone's there. You go in as a person of color. You sit there. Everyone there is casting is white. They or is even just a different ethnicity from yours. Not and they've got a caricature in their mind of what a black person, or Sri Lankan person, or someone from Kenya is supposed to be like. All of those stereotypes that we all of us get bombarded with our entire lives, that feeds into that whole idea that this is what X person, a black person, is supposed to be like. So you wind up, they're not seeing, on some level, they're not seeing you as an individual, and they're not seeing the parts that you have as an individual thing. They're looking to fill this stereotype. And if you veer away from that, it actually hurts you in your casting. So then you've got a decision to make. Well, am I going to lean into that because I want a job, or do I stand up and sort of express myself as a person? And that's a choice that none of us want to be making.
Yeah, especially when work is so scarce for everybody. Everyone, it's really scarce. And it's hard to take a stand when you can't eat.
That says it right there, Greg.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we'll probably bring it to a close in a short while, because I think that while you guys have said really awesome stuff, we need to try and make this a sustainable thing that we can keep doing roundtable discussions fairly frequently. So if it's okay with you, if you've got any other things that you wanted to say before we wrap it up, that's fine. But otherwise, we'll give it a tied up there.
Just one small thing I'd like to say. The diversity, and Holly and I talked about this before, but diversity it's an active thing. It's not called, like people say, love is a verb. Well, diversity is a verb. You can't just tick a box and say, okay, we tried or we did this. It's got to be an objective for any company, just like getting butts on seats is an objective for a company. It's got to be part of what you want to do, and it needs to be active. That's it.
Yeah. And don't stomp it, like kind of shun you out from trying to do that. I think that's one of the major things, because people find a way to everyone wants to be comfortable. I understand that, but any sense of discomfort just shuns people from trying to do what's better for everyone. So yeah, sometimes discomfort is actually a better way forward than being comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've felt discomfort through this whole process, but I recognize that is partly a product of my privilege. And it's something that it's no longer in any way an acceptable excuse to avoid these difficult and interesting but challenging conversations, simply because, especially if you're a white person, you feel uncomfortable. That's just not okay. Like, you have to move past that, I feel.
Yeah.
So I really would love to have you guys back again at some point if you time.
Yeah, happy to do it.
And some other people as well, and talk about this issue again, and also other issues that are associated with diversity and performance and Shakespeare. Yeah. Gregory, did you have any other final comments you wanted to make?
I was going to say, it's interesting, we call it diverse casting, or we're talking about diversity. The fact of the matter is, we are one of the most, and I think potentially we are the most per capita multiculturally diverse countries on earth. So what we do see on TV or wherever doesn't actually even reflect what Australia is. So when I've gone overseas, people are surprised to hear that I'm Australian, and they think that Australia is a certain way. So we're not even trying to change. We're not changing what's real. We're changing what's the false image put out there. Because, man, I grew up with so many different ethnicities around me. I have so many different friends of different ethnicities, all born in this country, all with this strong, thick Aussie accent too, and Aussie values and cultural, way of being. And I think what we're really pushing for is just an accurate representation of what Australia is. Like the screen in front of us is real Australia. We're not trying to make something weird or different. We're trying to show what's real, and that's what the arts is so brilliant at, bringing that to the public consciousness.
Yep. Well said.
Yeah. I really think it would be really great to be able to show that more with Shakespeare productions, because Shakespeare is often considered to be sort of whitey white, it's got so much cultural baggage attached to it. And I really hope that we can do better at Stream Shakespeare moving forward into the future with our casting and our directorial roles as well. And I'm very much looking forward, Haki, to what you come up with Titus Andronicus.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what I come up with too.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Insights are fantastic. Really interesting.
Thank you.